Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are back in War Thunder, and it is time to show you a new tank, the Infantry tank Mk.II A12 Matilda 2A F96. Now, instead of calling it that ridiculous name, I'm going to be calling it the 76 Matilda. The reason for this is it is the prize that you get for getting 6 challenges for tanks in the War Thunder Chronicles event. It is basically the British Matilda armed with an F96 76mm, which is the gun which you see on the T-34 1942 and the T-34E STZ, the F-34. The reason it's called the F96 is because it's mounted on the Matilda. In all extensive purposes, it is exactly the same gun. The only difference between them is the ammo types. You get 5 ammo types with the Matilda, including the mid-5 fuse, the BR350A, the BR350SP, the BR350B, and a HE and a shrapnel round. So what is the difference? Well, in the F-34 gun, you also get APCR and heat rounds, but at 3.3 battle rating, which the 76 Matilda is at, you generally don't need them, unless you get up-tiered and face a bunch of Shermans, which does happen sometimes from time to time. But what you should use when it comes to the ammo, what I do at least, is carry 20 rounds of APHE-BC and 10 rounds of the BR350SP, which is the AP-BC round. It has 105mm of pen, so it gives you that little bit of extra penetration of about 10mm if you think it will help, but you do lose that HE filler, which is why the BR350B is definitely much more. You should basically use that a lot more. When we look at the armor is extremely similar to the original Matilda in the British tree, which means that at 3.3 it is really unsatisfactory. At this level you are starting to run into Shermans with the 75, the M10, which is an absolute brawler against you. You're also now running into the Sherman 2, the Cromwell Mark I with the 57mm, and also the long-barreled 75s from the Germans. The Panzer IV F2 sits at 3.3, and it has armor penetration of up to 133mm. Well, there's nowhere on the Matilda that can actually stop this. The most armor you're going to get is on the turrets with 75mm of thickness, and effective thickness generally around 80mm. So, this Matilda really does suffer from the same issue that the other Matilda has. It is at a BR, which means that it can't really do a lot with its armor. It's going to get shot and it's going to get penetrated, so it's not something you can rely on. It does, though, have a lot of cover on the sides of the tank. A lot of people won't realize that the turret itself is actually 75mm all around, so that's at least kind of nice. And also you have some spaced armor on the tracks, which means if somebody shoots you in the side, it's generally not going to go through and it's not going to hit that ammo, which is located on the sides of the tank next to the gunner and loader, and also below the commander, which if hit will make you explode. So the big difference between the British one at 3.0 and this Russian premium equivalent, which does get the premium bonus, which is absolutely lovely, is the fact that this has the 76mm. Now, there are some issues with this 76mm, such as the cannon breech is actually going through the commander in the back of the tank. You can definitely see why Gaijin were having issues trying to model this thing, because the cannon breech nearly takes up the whole turret, and also you need to somehow fit 3 men in there since it's a Matilda. And the commander, well, let's just say if that gun gets fired, well, he's going to have a lot of issues, very similar to the 105 Tiger that we have in game, where if you actually look at the 105 Tiger and the crew inside of it, you'll see a very unfortunate man, which is stuck. Oh, did they move him? Oh, they might have got rid of him. Well, there used to be a man behind the gun which would take him out. But maybe they've got rid of him. How interesting, I never knew that. But back to the Matilda. The issue with the British one is that it has a 40mm cannon on it, which at 3.0 really doesn't do a lot. The 2-pounder struggles a lot, even though it still has okay pen of 80mm. When you penetrate something with it, it's not going to do a lot of damage. It still does okay against stuff like Panzer IV F2s, but the issue is you're not going to have a ton of power behind it. It's the same issue that a lot of these British guns have, where they're very good at nailing certain crew members with decent penetration. But once they enter the tank, they're only going to kill that one crew member. Whereas with this F96 76mm, because it has APHE rounds, once it gets into a tank, it's going to explode and it's going to absolutely annihilate it. So even though you don't have a ton of armor, you have a gun which is useful, which is definitely lacking on the other Matilda. The gun depression does take a hit though. One of the very interesting things about the British Matilda is that it has -20 gun depression. Well, looking at this Russian one, well, guess what? It has -2. And the reason for that is because of this absolutely monstrous cannon breech which is sat in the middle of the turret. But the gun is good, and the armor will bounce. A lot of people are probably not used to seeing Matildas in their games, so they won't really know where to shoot it. A lot of the time, when I actually have got hit over the battles I played in this, a lot of people have aimed straight at the turret and hit the cannon breech and nothing else, because the cannon breech takes up such a massive amount of area in the turret. It will soak rounds, whether they be AP, APHE, and therefore your crew may survive. So even though you only have 4 crew members, which is not great and realistic, because it means once you get penned in the turret, generally you will get knocked out, the cannon breech will soak some for you, giving that extra little bit of armor, which can help. It does mean you do have to repair, but that's a hell of a lot better than if you just get knocked out straight away. If this thing gets down tiered, let's say around 2.7, something like that, it's an absolute monster, even though it doesn't have a lot of speed, with a max speed of 24 kilometers an hour, which you can actually reach in a straight line, which is surprising for a top speed. But it does completely, even if you're going off a cliff, you will not get more than that 24 kilometers an hour. But you can make it up to 24 kilometers an hour. So even though it's slow, even though its armor doesn't make, well, it isn't very good at 3.3 or higher, if you do get your BR lowered, you have a gun which has a wonderful shielding platform behind it, with armor, as I said, up to about 75mm, which a lot of guns around 2.7 are going to struggle with. Especially with the spaced armor that you find on the tank. Now, what is also incredibly interesting about this 76 Matilda is that it gets artillery support. Now, I don't know if they did this on purpose or forgot that the Matilda Mk.II is a heavy tank, but I can't think of another heavy tank in game which has artillery support. So generally the light and medium tanks are the ones which are given it. But the Matilda Mk.II on release at this moment of recording does have artillery support, which helps it out a hell of a lot. It means that you can move forward, you can try and get people out of cover so you can shoot them. And because of the gun, because of this 76mm, you can actually try and attack people from afar. Even though around this BR you start getting machines which do have a decent amount of armor, even the Sherman. The Sherman does have a decent amount of armor because it is curved. You still run into stuff like Panzer IVs, which don't have a lot of armor. And from long ranges, this 76 will make mincemeat out of them. Just think about how well the T-34 1942 gun does against a lot of these German machines, and you'll understand what I'm saying, because it's exactly the same gun as the Matilda, barring some ammunition choices. The downside of this machine though, is that it is incredibly slow. If you have a good coordinated team or even a squad, it will be very easy to take this out, because it will be limited to sitting on one road, and that's really about it. It doesn't turn especially fast, it doesn't really do anything especially fast. But at least now, it has a gun that can do something. If you want to know the weak spots of this tank, there is a little holding, I should say, which is just below the turret and basically part of the upper glacis, where the viewport for the driver is. If you shoot there, it is 35mm, and what you will do is you will go straight through, hit the driver and hit the people behind it, knocking out the Matilda in one hit. Think about the IS-3, where it has that little triangle just in between the turret and the chassis. The Matilda has a very similar thing, and it is the driver port, so shoot it there. If you're shooting from the side, however, you don't really want to go through the tracks. Since it is spaced armor and it's going to take quite a lot to get through, the best thing to do is to focus on the turret. Even though it is 75mm, most guns at 3.3 should have that penetration, so shoot the turret, and you should at least take out one, maybe two of the crew members before the rest of your shell is eaten by that wonderful cannon breech, which will keep this thing alive much longer. Another interesting thing is that it has a Russian machine gun in it, which makes sense since, you know, it's basically a Russian add-on of the British tank. So overall, do I think this is a good little special tank? Yes, I do. I really like the idea of having these interesting prototype vehicles, which do get an increase in BR since they're better than the original, and are a gift vehicle. I think this is a good vehicle to have for this special for War Thunder Chronicles. It is something interesting, it is something to keep people enticed, and there is some basis in history for it. This thing was built, even though it was seen as having many issues, such as its speed, and to be quite honest, they wanted to use their guns on machines such as the T-34s instead of having to waste them on Matildas. But overall, it is a very interesting machine. Even though it is slow, it does have the armor to back it up most of the time if you run into some enemies, and in a little squad of maybe 3 or 4 of them, you're going to have a really fun time with this, because a lot of people are going to look at you, probably think that you're a normal Matilda, and then you start opening up with that 76. But make sure, if you are facing this thing, aim for that driver port. Even if you don't hit it, you may hit the turret ring, which is 60mm of armor, which is still less than the turret. Just don't aim for that cannon breech. A lot of people seem to, at this moment in time, which makes sense, it's only been out for maybe a day, but they shoot me straight into the cannon breech, and even though that knocks out my gun, it is completely useless, because I can just repair and I can get back into the battle. Since this thing is slow, you are going to have quite a lot of aircraft go after you as well. On the top of this machine, it only has 18mm of armor on the turret and 20mm on the back of the engine deck. So there will be certain large caliber guns which will be able to go through you like mincemeat and set you on fire all day, knock out your engine, hit people in your turret, but that's just gonna happen, unfortunately. It's something you're gonna have to get used to. If you also like the RNG element of the game, what you may want to do is, instead of just shooting this thing in the turret, if you want to try and bypass the cannon breech, what you should do is shoot it in the cupola where the commander is sitting. What will sometimes happen, as I said, this is very RNG based, it will hit the commander and the APHE shell will ricochet down and kill everything else. If it misses the commander, it will hit the back of the cupola and bounce downwards. That's basically what you're hoping for. It's not really ever going to overpen, especially since it is 75mm of armor. If you're in Japanese tanks, you are going to struggle against the Matilda, which is very unfortunate. The tank of choice to face the Matilda when it comes to the Japanese is the Chinu, and the Chinu only has 97mm of penetration, which means that in a out-and-out fight you may be able to pen it, but it's going to take a lot more effort than if you're using something like a long-barreled 75. So anyway, that is the Matilda Mk.II, I'll say its whole name again. The Infantry Tank Mk.II A12 Matilda 2A F96, a premium Russian Tier 2 battle rating 3.3. Tomorrow I'm going to be having a look at the PV-2D Harpoon, and next week, well, we'll have a look at the Excelsior. That'll be fun as hell. I'll catch you then.